Chapter 12. The spirit bear approached Cole with a slow, hazy stride, its head held low. Cole clenched his fists. Maybe he could hold up his arm. Maybe he had the energy for one last swing. 10 feet away, the bear paused where Cole's spit had hit the grass. It lowered its head and sniffed. Still eyeing Cole, the spirit bear casually licked up the spit, raised its head, eyes mild and curious, then turned and sauntered away. Cole felt a sudden rush of tears and emotion. Death would be okay if it came fast. Existence ending in one last violent moment of defiance. Cole could understand that kind of death. But here he lay exposed, alone, ignored, his life leaking from his body like water from some rusty bucket. Even a bear considered him insignificant, licking up his spit as casually as if it were dew. The spirit bear never once slowed or looked back. Cole fought back his tears until the last trace of white faded into the thick underbrush, and then he began to sob. He was dying, alone and insignificant, and nobody cared. Drifting off into a dream world, Cole imagined he was a baby bird in a nest. Around him, a storm raged, and the trees swayed violently. Driving rain pelted him like hail. Frantic, Cole struggled to fly, but he couldn't escape the nest. All he could do was open his beak wide and raise it upward toward the sky. The action, a simple admission that he was powerless. There were no conditions, no vices, no lies, no deceit, no manipulation, only submission and a simple desire to live. He wanted to live, but for that he needed help, otherwise his life would end in the nest. Suddenly, the violent winds calmed and the rain stopped. Cole strained upward with his opened beak as his senses drifted back into the real world of pain. Again, he was in his wounded body on an island prison. The storm had stopped and something had awakened him, an overpowering animal smell. His eyes opened. Looming over Cole, its breath warm and musty, towered the spirit bear inches away. Its legs rose like pillars beside Cole's arms, and mist glistened in its white hair. The world stopped. For Cole, there was no wind, no cold, no time, no pain, no sound. There existed only one object, the spirit bear. Its shiny black eyes held eternity. Its intense gaze penetrated, never wavering. Surprisingly, Cole did not feel the terror he had once known. Maybe the spirit bear had come to kill him. Maybe it was only curious. Whatever the reason, Cole gazed calmly back up at the bear. He knew he would fight to the last moment to live. Any animal would do that. Even worms coiled back and forth to escape capture and death. But Cole also knew that if he died, his time had arrived. It would be like the baby birds, or like the worm or the mouse. It was his turn. Cole's eyes watered and he blinked. This was the end, then. Resigned to his fate, he gazed into the bear's eyes, but found no aggression, only curiosity. It was as if the bear were waiting. But waiting for what? Instinctively, Cole gathered what little spit he could in his mouth. When the meager fluid bathed his tongue, he stopped, paused, and then swallowed. Cole did not understand why he had swallowed or what happened next. Hesitantly, he raised his hand off the ground, as if reaching for an electric fence. He cautiously extended his fingers toward the spirit bear's shoulder, inches away, and he paused. Awareness flickered in the bear's eyes. Cole forced his hand forward until his fingers touched the bear's moist white coat. It was as if he was going to die. He wanted to know what the animal felt like that killed him. Still, the bear remained motionless. Cole's fingers sank into the bushy white hair until he touched solid body. With his fingertips, he felt warmth. He felt the bear's breath and heartbeat, and he felt one more thing. He felt trust. But why? Already he had tried to kill the bear, he had spit at it. This bear had defied him, and he had hated it with every fiber of his existence. Still, touching the bear, Cole paused, and then he drew his hand away. The spirit bear never blinked, never twitched a muscle. Only when Cole's hand again rested on the ground, only then did the towering bear lower its huge head as if nodding. A second time it dipped its head, then stepped back away. With one fluid motion, it swung around and ambled silently down toward the waterline. Cole watched, forgetting to breathe. He expected the bear to stop when it reached the shoreline, but the great white animal waded into the water and then swam with powerful strokes out into the bay toward the open ocean. A thin wake spread like a giant V behind the departing creature until it became a silhouetted speck, finally disappearing. Cole let his imagination keep the bear visible a while longer. Finally, even that image faded. Cole blinked and took a breath as if he were awakening. Around him, the land had become alive. A clear horizon showed under a dark blanket of clouds. Reflections of blue and gray swirled on the water as if a fresh breeze ruffled the spruce boughs and sent ripples along the shoreline. Seagulls screeched and squawked their way out over the bay, diving and hunting for food. Barely 100 feet away, the mother seal and her spotted pups appeared, their dog-like heads peeking out of the water. The air still carried the rotten smells of vomit and death, but also the fresh odor of seaweed and moss and cedar and salt. Vivid colors glistened wet into the bright light. A strange thought occurred to Cole. The world was beautiful. Yes, the world was beautiful. Even the wet moss, the crushed grass near his hand was beautiful. Staring at the delicate patterns, he wondered why he had never noticed this all before. How much beauty had he missed in his lifetime? How much beauty had he destroyed? But the past was another time, and another life that Cole could never recapture, and didn't want to. He only knew the moment, and this moment was alive, the most alive he had ever felt. It struck Cole as odd that he should feel this way at the very moment when his body had reached the point at which it could no longer exist. Even as he stared at the moss inside him, the balance was shifting to the other side. Clinging to life was like hanging from a bar on the playground at school. On the playground, he could hold on for a long time, but when his grip finally tired, his fingers slipped quickly and he fell. Now Cole felt him slipping fast. He had struggled too long to hold on, his energy bleeding away. Now it was his turn to die. This thought made Cole sad, but he accepted it. He felt content. Before the end of life, he had seen beauty. He had trusted and been trusted. That was enough. Cole's head rested on a patch of the spongy moss that acted as a pillow. His pain seemed to float like a haze outside his body. He closed his eyes, relaxed, and let the balance shift. And as it shifted, Cole felt himself floating upward into a cloud. Gradually, a buzzing sound gathered in his head, growing louder and louder. The sound bothered Cole. He wanted quiet now. Abruptly, the buzzing stopped, and squawking seagulls surrounded his body. He could hear them arguing over him. This was what it felt like to die. He hadn't imagined it being so noisy. The seagulls began pecking at his arms and legs. Cole could not open his eyes, but he jerked his arm. Why couldn't the seagulls leave him alone? Why couldn't they wait just a little longer until he had died? Did they have to pick meat off his bones while he was still breathing? Instead of stopping, the pecking grew worse. Now the gulls were pulling at his legs and shoulders with giant beaks, trying to lift him. Bizarre sensations bombarded Cole as his body was dragged and bumped across the rocks. Sharp pain stabbed through his wounds. Then the loud cry of the seagulls turned into garbled gibberish as if they tugged at his shirt and shoes. What were they doing to him? Gradually, soft and warm sensations enveloped Cole, like being wrapped in a blanket. His head was tilted forward, and warm liquid filled his mouth. It didn't make sense. How could the rain be warm? His head must be in a puddle with muddy water running past his lips. Or maybe it was blood. He spit out the liquid, and it felt warm on his neck. He didn't want to drown in blood or muddy water. But again, warm liquid flowed past his lips, and Cole gave in. It didn't matter anymore how he died. He could drown, freeze, or be pecked apart by seagulls. All that mattered was that balance had changed, and now he was drifting over the edge. Hang in there, champ. Hang in there. A voice sounded. The buzzing sounded again, louder, deafening, like a swarm of giant bees preparing to attack. Then the world tilted and bounced. With each bounce, pain throbbed in Cole's chest. Something cradled his neck and steadied his head when the jarring grew too intense. He kept trying to push himself over the edge, but again, his head was lifted and more warm fluid flowed past his lips. Hang with me, champ. Cole spit out another mouthful. The sweet fluid was keeping his pain alive, allowing all the bouncing and the noise to continue, but nothing could stop it from leaking past his teeth and swollen, parched tongue. The warm fluid flowed down his throat and brought back the cold. Chills racked his body. In uncontrollable spasms, he moaned. When would this horrible nightmare end? And then suddenly, he awoke. His eyes opened, and nothing made sense. Gone were the bay and the fallen tree. A dark and restless sky still moved overhead. But where was the hard ground, the mud, the dead birds? A thick blanket held both of his arms close to his chest. The blanket was brown and not the colorful atau. Where was the atau? Cole's vision blurred, but he understood that he was lying at the bottom of a shallow aluminum skiff. Kneeling on one knee, steering, was Edwin, the Tlingit elder who had helped bring him out to the island. Instead of his normal detached, faraway look, Edwin's eyebrows furrowed with concern. Cole blinked, hard to focus. His head rested on someone's lap. Then he recognized Garvey leaning over him, his face haggard with worry. "We'll be home soon," Garvey shouted above the roar of the engine. Too weak to answer, Cole let his eyes close again. He struggled to recall what had happened, but couldn't. Garvey shouted something to Edwin, and the engine revved louder. Spray whipped across the bow as the boat surged into the waves. Cole held his breath and tensed to lessen the pain in his ribs. It was as if somebody were beating on his chest with a bat. He felt Garvey's strong grip tighten each time they hit a big wave. The hard bucking lasted forever, and Cole was drunk with pain by the time the boat finally slowed. The screaming of the engine grew muted, replaced by anxious voices shouting to them. Garvey and Edwin shouted back, and the boat bumped against something. Cole opened his eyes. They had pulled alongside a dock. A cluster of people crowded next to the boat, staring down at him. People were moving, reaching, shouting. Cole cried out in pain as he was lifted from the boat. His ribs and leg felt as if they were being ripped from his body. Someone slipped and Cole's legs scraped against the edge of the dock. He heard himself cry out. More footsteps pounded and voices shouted. The dock swayed and Cole grabbed blindly at the air to stop the world from moving. He couldn't take it any more of this torture. It had become violent. The commotion continued. Clinket, tilting dangerously back and forth. Cole felt himself lifting onto a stretcher and carrying up the dock to a waiting van. Doors slammed, a motor revved, and there were more bouncing as the van raced down the road. Cole's pain faded into delirium. The next sensation was of entering a room and being lifted into a soft, warm bed. Careful hands dried him, worked his pants off. He dreamed that the spirit bear was ripping at his leg, but instead of a growl, a woman's soft voice said, "Easy, easy, you'll be okay. Just relax." Cole's uncontrollable shivers were replaced by a hot sweating as a towel patted his forehead. When the commotion finally stopped, Cole lay completely spent, drifting in and out of consciousness. He felt a warm blanket being tucked in around his neck, and he opened his eyes. Where was the Atau? Seeing Cole's eyes open, Edwin and Garvey stepped forward, one on each side of the bed. Edwin studied Cole. "Sure busted yourself up," he said plainly. Garvey nodded in agreement. "Lightning knocked down a big tree. The branches must have hit you." Cole tried to speak, but no words came to his throat. A short, round-faced Tlingit woman crowded in beside the bed. "His wounds aren't from any tree," she said, pulling back the blanket. "Look." Edwin glanced down at the bloody red gashes surrounded by puffy, ashen skin and whistled low. Those are bite and claw wounds." The woman nodded. "He's been attacked by a bear." Cole nodded. Fear flashed in Garvey's eyes. "I'm okay." Cole succeeded in grunting weakly. A thin smile failed to hide Garvey's concern. "Half your bones are busted. Your body is swollen like one huge mosquito bite, and you're nearly starved to death. Believe me, champ, you're not okay." Cole forced a nod. "I am okay," he grunted again.